in a hell of a fix. And this was the opening remark of the teacher who told us about, or taught us about, the Italian army. We learned about the Italian army, we learned about the French army, which really didn't exist anymore, so to speak. We learned about the Russian, and of course certainly about the German army. We had the German prisoners there who, when we went on maneuvers, would be brought in as so-called prisoners of war, and we had to go through the routine of interrogating them. And of course it was really a school activity, so we were graded, and our grades there had a lot to do with our next assignment. And the next assignment, well, one night, without any warning or so, after we went through this beautiful camp, good food, lots of physical training, one night we were ordered, pack up and get ready. So in no time at all, we had all our stuff in a duffel bag and ready to ship. And we were put on the train. The train ended up on the dock in New York City. I think it was New York City. Everything was dark, blacked out. We marched down. The Red Cross was lined up there, handing out donuts and coffee. And we went aboard the ship. Didn't know exactly where we went, but it was a very nice, clean Scottish vessel. All the personnel was English. The food on that vessel was typical British. For breakfast, invariably, we would have fish of some sort. And there was no noon meal, and there was just 2 meals a day, which was really enough. And also, it was blackout. On deck, every morning or afternoon, whichever happens to be, a group of men were marched up and had to go through calisthenics. Everybody tried to keep them in good shape. The ship was badly crowded. The enlisted men had to sleep in 3 shifts. Officers, of course, had a little cabin, but a little cabin designed for 1 was occupied by 3. So it was an interesting trip, completely blackout, until finally we got into Glasgow, Scotland. It was a rainy day. I understand it's usually raining there. We got off the ship, grabbed our bags, whatever we had, and marched on a train. The train started out. Red Cross came along to give us a little sewing kit, needle, thread, buttons, all in OD. I still have mine after all these years, after 30 years I still have it. Still carried in my traveling case. It's handy. I hardly ever used very much of it. We ended up in Camp Litchie, or Litchfield, near Birmingham, England. Okay, we were now in England. That was late in the summer, and waiting there for assignment in the European theater. While in Birmingham, again, we had a chance to see a little bit of England. We went to a few plays and concerts in Birmingham. I think we were there about 3 weeks, and the only duty we had would be to report every evening for retreat. And we had to censor the mail of the men from Europe before the mail was shipped on to the United States. But it was just a matter of waiting. We even were issued gas masks and gas equipment, which, however, we never used. And so it got later in the year, and finally we were ordered to prepare for the trip to the continent. Now that was late in the year, about September or October 1944. Normandy, the fighting in Normandy was still going on. when we were getting ready to leave. I want to backtrack a little and reminisce about the time, World War II, and all the different assignments I had. I mentioned Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. It was the research field of the Army Air Force. At that time there wasn't a special Air Force or a separate Air Force. The Air Force was part of the US Army. One assignment I had was developing radio noise eliminator. It ended up in a piece of equipment which is still being used today on all the large civilian planes and army planes. It really is a tube. There are three usually of them mounted at a very extreme edge of the wings and at a tail assembly. The tubes are filled with usually a wake and anti-freeze. The theory being that the wake presents very fine, sharp points where the static is discharged from. Well, these items, as I say, were developed primarily for the B-17 and the B-24 during World War II, and now they are still being used on the 747. Next time you go on a plane, look at the far edge of the wings, and you see three or so tubes sticking out. They are about 12 inches long, and really you wonder what it is all about. Well, that's what it is. They are there to eliminate static noise. Another assignment I had was to work on the radio communication between the tow plane and the gliders, preparatory to the fighting or the British primarily project or plan to take the bridges over the Rhine in Holland, the Remagen Bridge. The work consisted mainly in developing walkie-talkies between the tow plane and the glider and trying to make them useful. The noise in the gliders was so bad because of the loose skin on the wings and the fragile kind of structure that it was very, very difficult to understand something. So it was a continuous improvement of walkie-talkies until we got them so the men could understand each other. Again, this kind of walkie-talkie, of course, was used not only between tow plane and the gliders, but later on it was used throughout the Army activities with the field line troops. Nothing strange, and they are to be used today. Another interesting assignment was instrument landing equipment. The pilots in those days did not really have any confidence in radar equipment. It was too new and wasn't dependable enough. So we tried to make it as safe and as good as possible, and we would fly with the pilots, make them come in, almost blind landing, just depending entirely on the radar equipment. And it turned out to be quite good, and of course over the years it has developed into something which is now used all over the world in all the commercial airlines. One other project I was connected with was the LORAN equipment. That's long range navigation. Very, very interesting equipment that was being developed in 42 and 43 when we had display units at right field, and we then started to install the master and the slave transmitters all over the world, so to speak. Again, this kind of equipment is still being used. Well, then, as I mentioned previously, we went through military intelligence training at Cambridge and eventually landed in Europe. The first stop in Europe, of course, was Paris. Paris had just been cleaned out, taken over, and the military intelligence unit had quite a large compound in a suburb called Vessinay. We were there for about a week, enjoying a little sightseeing in Paris, and the main purpose there was to form the teams that then would be assigned to the various units like division or regiment or headquarters. I was assigned to the IPW, that is interrogating prisoners of war, and we were assigned to the 30th Division, which was stationed in the vicinity of Aachen. We were with them for about a month or so, until all of a sudden we heard rumors, and to us there were rumors, about the German counterattack just south of us. Well, that was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. Things were pretty difficult for the interrogators. Many of us, in my team for instance, out of something like 8 men, 4 of them spoke with a decided European accent, and American soldiers, officers and men alike, of course, looked at us with a little suspicious glance in their eye. One time we were, or by that time we had been assigned to the 75th Division. We went into a forward area. I got into a private house for a billet, and the headquarters was right across the street in a school building. It was dark, and I went from our billet over to the school building and gave the password, which that time had been Coke, and the reply would be bottle. So I went over there, was stopped, he said Coke, but apparently even in that one simple word there was enough of an accent, so an officer there, he was a major, he said, come again? I said Coke. He said, what else? I said bottle. And I was supposed to say that, so there he had a gun on me and made me hold up my hands and made me walk over to the guard, and he asked the guard, do you know this man? He said, sure, he's the interpreter. So the major apologized. That was one occurrence. I think I could mention half a dozen of them. I made a great effort in getting the men, the enlisted men especially, acquainted with everybody. We would go and talk with every soldier in the unit that we could meet, just so they would get used to us, so we wouldn't have too many accidents like these. It was interesting. That happened to be in Holland. The Germans had come in American uniform, dropped from parachute, and did a lot of damage behind the lines. So naturally the American soldiers were really on edge. Well, fine. Eventually we went on, pushed the Germans back. The 75th Division was very active in one town where practically that was the one town the IPW practically took the whole town by accident. We went up there, and instead of stopping at where we established